Welcome back to Keen on Australia. We're the show that helps you understand what it's really like to move countries and a fresh start here in Australia. I'm your host, Darren Keen, and today we're going to dive into a really important topic. We're going to talk about super and potentially moving some of your retirement funds here to Australia. It's going to be quite an in-depth talk. We're going to talk with a very special guest, and we're going to unpack everything about the super scheme and how it works. Today, I'm joined with Bill Watson. He is the CEO of First Super. It's one of Australia's leading industry fund providers here in Australia, and we're going to cover everything on how the system works. Bill, welcome to the show, and why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Darren. So I lead First Super. We manage about 5.5 billion of funds under management. We've got about 12,500 New Zealanders in our fund through KiwiSaver, and they're out of 80,000 members. The big thing about us as a fund, we like personal service. So we've got our own contact centre, means you can get through in less than a minute, all things being equal. And we've got staff who are out in the field dealing with members. I'm really privileged to be in an industry that helps deliver dignified retirements. And that's what people in the industry shouldn't forget. That's our job, more money in people's accounts so they can have a great retirement.
That's awesome. And I love that personal touch that you guys answer the phone quickly. And I've actually had that experience with getting you on the show. It's been quite a great experience in regards to contact and people coming back. And that's really important when you're talking about people's retirement funds.
Yeah.
For someone that's moving from New Zealand to Australia, how does Australia Super actually work? Obviously, they know about KiwiSaver and we've got people that move from the UK, etc. But what is the super system here?
The super system's quite different. So the first thing is you work as an employee. Your boss has got to contribute 12% of your salary. So if you earn $100,000 a year, that's 12 grand. $50,000 a year, that's 6 grand. And that's over and above your salary. Unlike New Zealand, you don't have to make any personal contribution yourself. And unlike New Zealand, your boss doesn't get to pick the amount they put in. What that means is you can really make significant progress saving for your retirement with 12% going in each year. The average Australian superannuation balance is about 5 times that of KiwiSaver's balance, and that'll give you an idea of just the power of 12% year in, year out. The other thing is about the Australian system. When you retire, you can take your money from age 60 onwards, provided you're retiring. That's called a condition of release. In New Zealand, it's 65. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
That's awesome. And like I say, it looks like a supercharged version of what people are used to.
Yeah.
Have they got to be in Australian super for a certain amount of time before they can transfer KiwiSaver, or is it something they can do as soon as they get here?
So the critical things about transferring money, your KiwiSaver money into Australia is firstly, you've got to be permanently migrating. So if you're only here for 6 months or whatever, you can't do that. You've got to have a tax file number. And what you've got to do is select a superannuation fund that takes KiwiSaver, and there's only about 4 or 5 of those, of which First Super is one of them. Now, if you're a New Zealand that's been in Australia for a while, and you've got money back in New Zealand, you can transfer that across, but you might not be able to transfer it into the fund of which you're currently a member. So you need to check with your fund about whether they can take the KiwiSaver money. If you're in a fund that can't, you can still open an account at another fund that takes KiwiSaver money. But once it arrives in Australia, you can't transfer that money from the KiwiSaver fund into the other superannuation fund. So the rules are really, it's about having the ability to accept the KiwiSaver money.
Awesome. So if you're a fund like yours that can accept it, how does the process actually work? How do they get their money from New Zealand to here?
All right. So there's some paperwork that needs to be done. First things first is you need to get onto your fund. They'll issue you a letter, I think, that says that they can accept the KiwiSaver money. Then you've got to fill in a form with your KiwiSaver fund, insert all the details, and then it gets processed. The other thing is you've got to do a stat dec to say that you're a permanent resident of Australia. And of course, the other missing bit that goes without saying is you need a tax file number.
Yeah, awesome. So, and how long was this process sort of taking for most people from they start to finish?
Well,
is it a couple of weeks, a couple of months?
It can be really, really quick. So depending upon how good the processes are between the two funds, and what the Kiwi fund is in New Zealand, how quickly they turn it around. The best we've had is about a 48-hour turnaround, which was terrific.
Wow.
Um, yeah, that surprised everybody, including our member who didn't actually want the money then. And then it can take up to 6 or 8 weeks. So sometimes there's just a lot of stuffing around with identifying the accounts. Then the money gets transferred across to the complying Australian super fund, and they've got to identify it. So there's a little bit of manual handling involved. It's not like transferring money from one bank account to the next. So you can reasonably expect somewhere between 7 to 14 days.
Okay, that's not a bad time frame for most people.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
when they're doing that transfer, I sort of picked up before with what you said, but I think if they've got KiwiSaver and they decide they're going to be in Australia and they move it,
Yeah,
do they have to move the entire amount?
yeah. You've got to move all of your KiwiSaver account money, so you can't do a partial transfer.
Mhm.
And if you're really lucky and you've got a lot of money in your KiwiSaver account, there are some limits on how much you can transfer from Australia to New Zealand. So that, New Zealand to Australia. And there's a thing called a concessional contribution cap of 120,000 Aussie a year. If you've got more than 120,000 Aussie sitting or the equivalent in your KiwiSaver account, there's some stuff that you can do to bring forward concessional contributions. But ultimately, if you've got more than $360,000 Australian, the equivalent of that in New Zealand, then you can't do it because of to do with tax. You really need to get it. So if you've got less than $100,000, it's pretty straightforward. More than that, you need to get some financial advice just to make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot.
So for the people listening that do have those larger funds, can they come to you to get advice for that, for like your team, or do they need to go get a financial planner or?
They can come to our team to get advice because this is just a part of the way our advice offering. Other than that, they need to find a planner that's got experience dealing with KiwiSaver transfers. And there are some of those about, and good old Mr. Google will help you with that.
Awesome. So they get this money over here, they've got this large sum. What's the story with them using it to buy a home? Can your fund help them release some to buy a
Yeah,
first home here in Australia?
yeah. So the really good thing about transferring your KiwiSaver money across is you can use that for the first home saver scheme. So the interesting thing is with your Aussie super, the money that your boss has been putting in, you can't use that for first home saver scheme, but you can use the KiwiSaver amount. So that's up to $15,000 out of your KiwiSaver portion. So we've got a lot of new members who have transferred the money across, and they want to buy a house in Australia. They can do that. There's some rules around it. It's got to be the first house that you've got in Australia. And it doesn't matter if you've got a house in New Zealand or anywhere else for that matter, but it has to be your first home. And the other thing is that a couple can both access the first home saver scheme. So basically, if you've got two Kiwis who've moved to the Goldie, they can both take $15,000 out of that KiwiSaver portion. And
That's great.
there's some other strategies that you can use through salary sacrifice to boost the first home saver amount. But it's the maximum you can do is 15,000 in any 1 year. So you might spread it over 2 financial years, and that gives you 30 grand. And then if you've got somebody else in the house, that's another 30. So that gives you 60. There's some tax that gets taken out by the ATO, but just for simplicity's sake, there's the potential there to give yourself a nice leg up in your first 12 months here.
So if someone was arriving around April, May, they could probably have quite an opportunity to supercharge that if they planned it well,
Yeah,
just right on the edge of two tax years there, yeah?
yeah. That's the whole thing about doing 2 tax years. Um, so yeah, it just makes sense. And of course, the other thing, Darren, is you've got to have the ability to be able to salary sacrifice. And I know money's tight and all of those things, but if you are saving for a home, you can do the salary sacrifice. That gives you the 15 grand. You've got the KiwiSaver amount. And there's 30 grand minus the tax, and you're off and running.
Awesome. So what if someone's come over, they've gone into a job, their job said, hey, here's a super fund, just fill this form in, and they've got an
Yeah,
industry one. And then all of a sudden they go, you know what, I want to move my KiwiSaver. You
yeah,
said before only certain funds can do the KiwiSaver, and once it's there, it stays there.
Yeah.
Can they close the super fund they already have and move all that money to you guys? Can you manage the whole lot?
Yeah, we can do that. So the thing is, the first thing is when you get a job, you've got a choice. You can pick your own superannuation fund. So the boss can't tell you what fund you're going into.
Yep.
So for people who are arriving, one of the first things they might want to think about is if they've got KiwiSaver, is this a fund that can take KiwiSaver? If it's not, I will nominate like First Super or whatever the other funds are. So they can do that. Now, if you've got an existing account, say, for example, you're a member of a big fund that begins with A,
Yep.
what I counsel potential new members to do is you've just got to check about the insurance in super that you've got. Because if you move from one fund to another, then you lose the insurance that you've got with your existing fund, and you get the insurance with the new fund. For most people, that's okay. But say, for example, something's happened to you health-wise since you've joined the big fund that begins with A, you might have to disclose that on going to the new fund. So it's called a pre-existing condition. So you just need to have a bit of a think about, again, am I shooting myself in the foot by closing down the other fund? People talk about fee savings. That's fine. But for a small group of people, the fee savings aren't the issue. It's making sure you've got cover.
And that is absolute gold because that's the thing people don't talk about. Everyone goes, oh, what about the fees I might have with two funds?
Yeah.
There's certain clients, as you've said out there, they really need to understand what they might give up by changing one fund to another. So that's great advice telling people
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah, you just need to think it just gives me the absolute irrits to focus on fees because there's a lot of other things that you can lose in trying to save nickel and dime yourself.
Yeah. And you said before that obviously super is supercharged over KiwiSaver and
Yeah.
you're seeing way bigger funds than for the average person.
Yeah.
But how's super here in Australia actually performing compared to KiwiSaver? Like, are you guys outperforming the New Zealand counterparts? Or are you pretty similar or?
It depends what fund you're in and it depends what strategy you're in. But, the general rule of thumb is Australian funds are outperforming New Zealand funds. There's a couple of reasons for that. Is it's the age of our system. So you pick our fund, we've been around since the mid to late 80s. There's a lot of assets that we've invested in the 90s and the zeros, infrastructure assets that you just can't buy any longer. So what that means is we've got these really good returns that we're getting on average. It's about 10 to 12% over many years. Setting up a new fund like the KiwiSaver funds is they haven't had the opportunity of buying these assets 20 and 30 years ago when they were cheap. So there's a bit of an argument about liquid investments, better quality ones. But when it comes to the performance of picking Australian and international shares, the performance is pretty much like for like. It'd be pretty, if you don't have as good a performance as a New Zealand fund with Australian and international equities, you're not doing your job properly.
And look, that's a great tip pointing out that you actually need to look maybe at what some of the things the fund actually owns and how long it's been established. But
Yeah.
what are some of the other things new people should look at when they're comparing funds? Is there fees? Is it insurance? Is it performance?
Yeah.
What sort of
So
things should they check?
all right. So you've got to work out what's important to you first of all. So fees are one thing. You can check the fees, but what you've got to do is check the long-term net returns. So performance over 12 months. We're not an English Premier League side where all you're doing is chasing the FA Cup at the end of every season. Our time horizon's a lot longer than that. So you look at the return over a 10-year period, and that gives you a pretty good idea of consistency. Now, clearly, past performance doesn't predict future performance, but if you've been getting it right over 10 years, it's reasonable to say that you probably get it right over the next 10 years. So check the net returns. And what you've also got to check is just how they invest. So there's a thing called growth and defensive assets. You've got some funds that have got a lot of growth assets. So that means current markets, things are fantastic. But when the bum drops out of the market, you will stand to lose quite a bit. There's others that are more conservative, so provide a bit of protection. And that then goes to the long-term returns. The other thing is check the insurance. Not all insurance is the same. Some of the cover that some funds provide is very cheap, is very modestly priced, but there's a reason why it's modestly priced. It doesn't give you the benefit when you need it. And then you look at some other stuff like access to financial advice. All funds will provide advice either directly or through third parties, and it's how they charge for it. So we're a bit different from other funds in that we've got a thing called intra-fund advice, which is advice about our investment options. We don't charge members for that, whereas other funds will charge you for that. So if you get one lot of advice from us in a couple of year period, that's more than paid for your fees. So things like that. So there's a bit of a shopping around to do. And then I've mentioned service. It depends upon what kind of service you want. For some people, they just want an app, do everything over that. That's great. But if you're somebody that actually wants to talk to a human being and get a bit of advice, then you've got to shop around and find the right fund. And that's why I've laboured the point about service is really important for us. We like to think that that makes us pretty different from everybody else.
Awesome. And look, it's great. People move here. We have hundreds of thousands of people move here, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, it doesn't work for everyone. If
Mhm.
someone did move their KiwiSaver and start working here and have a super fund, etc., and they decide it didn't work and they pack up and move back to New Zealand,
Yeah.
what happens? Does it go back to KiwiSaver? Does it stay here? What happens?
You can do two things. You can transfer your money, your KiwiSaver money and the Aussie super money to New Zealand. So you open up a KiwiSaver account. So it all goes in there. So it's not a one-way street. You can take the money back home with you. You can also leave it in Australia for a period of time, and there's some tax advantages in relation to that, but people need to get advice on that. But KiwiSaver earnings are taxed effectively at marginal rates, whereas in Australia they're only taxed at 15 cents on the dollar. The other thing is when you move into the retirement phase in Australia, there's no tax. So there are some benefits there. So it's one of those things, if you're thinking of moving back on a permanent basis, a bit of advice before you pull the trigger is probably not a bad thing. And you might find that maintaining an address in Australia and an account's not a bad thing.
Cool. Oh, and obviously we talked a lot about the Kiwis.
Yeah.
What if someone's moving from Europe, either got, say, a UK private pension or something like that? Is there any way to move those to Australia?
Yeah, there is. But I've got to say, the KiwiSaver, the Trans-Tasman Portability Arrangement, as it's known by its real thing, is really easy and frictionless. Transferring your UK pension, you can do it. There's some rules around it. It's a bit more difficult. And also, depending upon the scheme that you're in the UK, whether it's a lump sum one or whether it's what we call is defined benefit, you get a pension, you need to get advice on that um, because you might be losing particularly if you're in a scheme that gives you a pension for life and it's indexed against inflation. You can do it, but you need to take a deep breath and not sort of regard it as one of those personal admin tasks that you just tick off the list. It does have some consequences, and you need really good advice on that. You need to hunt around and find a planner that's actually got the skills, rather than somebody that's just offering a service because they're going to make some money out of it. This is a pretty critical advice. So if you're a UK cop coming out here, I'd say get some advice before you do anything.
Cool. And obviously, advice and education is the most important thing. So, how do
Yeah,
people ensure they're in the right type of fund? So, say they pick you guys,
yeah,
but within your fund, there's different ways to invest. How do they
yeah.
know they're in the right bit for their part of life or their risk profile?
They talk to one of our planners. And that's what I've talked to. This is the intra-fund advice. We've got 5 investment options. There's a high growth, which is basically 100% in shares, down to cash, which is pretty boring and low returns. You get advice from a planner, and the process they go through is doing a risk profile to work out what your appetite for risk is. So whether you're somebody that's not going to sweat when the bum drops out of the market, as it has when we're being interviewed, down to somebody who needs to pull the doona up to their nose at all times. And they also can take into account personal circumstances. That becomes personal advice, and it's a bit different.
Mhm.
But for most people, it's doing the risk profile, the planner understanding what your needs and wants are, and then making a choice. General rule of thumb is if you're a young person, like in your 20s, you're better off being subject to advice and all of that stuff. You're better off being in a much higher growth option because you've got 40 or 50 years before you need the money. And over that period of time, growth will outperform anything else. But if you're somebody that's worried, then it's more conservative approach, or you're getting closer to retirement, you might want to dial the risk down. But that's all about advice. So depending upon what fund you're in, you either might pay for it, member of our fund, you won't.
That's awesome. And look, it's been great. You've been highlighting some of this sort of stuff. And obviously, there's a few of them that really stood out to me.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got all that personal advice. You've got you guys actually pay for the advice for your clients. You've got phone numbers you can talk to real people. What are some of the other things that make First Super really stand out and be different to everyone else?
Um, our fund, there are all of the staff, both in our trustee office, that's the people who look after the money, marketing and comms, and the administrator. There's only 80 of us. We're a small bunch of people who deal with members, touch members every day of the week. So for example, I had a member who sent me an email querying something to do with our contractual arrangements with a number of shareholders. I've responded to him, and I'll be catching up with him for a cup of coffee in Sydney in early in December. I mean, that's what sets us apart. We've also got people who go out to members' houses. And the really important thing is when a tragedy occurs, somebody passes, we're there to give people a hand to actually fill the forms out and make sure that claims get paid. So, our insurance team, Kitty Rose and her gang of ladies, they just do a fantastic job. So what you pick up, Darren, is for us, it's personal, and that really makes a difference. We invest the money, we do a good job, we create value for members, we provide good service, but it's the bit where if you're cranky, you can actually track me down and track my colleagues down, and you get the kind of personal service that you want. I like to think our fund is a bit like an old-fashioned regional country bank. You go into the bank in the old days, you knew who the branch manager was, you knew who the accountant was, and they looked after you.
Yeah. And that's what I love too. Oh, that's how our personal business runs as well. And that's what I like personally when I'm interacting with other companies too. That personal touch and having a real person to talk to makes
Yeah,
all the difference versus just some random call center that who knows who when you get a different person every time.
yeah, yeah, yes, yeah. Look, absolutely. We're only as good as the last bit of service that we've provided to members. There will be times when we will disappoint members. So KiwiSaver is complex, and one of the things that people either don't understand or fail to appreciate at the time that they're transferring the money is that the KiwiSaver money can only sit in certain super funds, and it can't go into a self-managed super fund. So we don't make the rules, but our job is to apply them. So once you've picked one of the 4 or 5 funds, the KiwiSaver money sits there until you hit the age of 65 or go back to New Zealand. We can't change those rules. Yes, you can get cranky with us, but we can't change the rule.
Yeah. And that's great. And look, for everyone out there, this has been a great show. There's lots of advice. The key things in it is to make sure you obviously ask at the start and get your education. There is people here like First Super that will happily spend the time with you to give you all of your options and understand what's happening. Remember, the show today was only general advice. If you need specific advice for your purposes, please reach out to someone and get advice tailored for you. With that being on the show, I have to thank you for coming on, Bill. It's been great. In
Right.
the show notes, we're going to put some details for how people can get a hold of you guys if they do want to look at transferring super. And like I say, I thank you for coming on the show again. It's been amazing.
Thank you very much, Darren, for the opportunity. Love speaking to you and love speaking to your pod recipients. Thanks, mate.
Thanks. And for everyone out there, that's another episode of Keen on Australia. We'll be back again soon. Remember, we only got Bill on here today because all of you guys reached to us and said, I want to know more about super. So we go out and we find the guests you want. We ask the questions you ask us to ask. Then we get the show out. If you want to know something, reach out to us anytime through any of our medias. That's how we get our guests. If you think you could come on the show and help people moving, reach out to me. We'd love to have you on it.